Joe is an author and contributor at one of America's largest political websites, that being the Great Gateway Pundit, which is run by his twin brother and founder, Jim Hoff. His online posts at TGP have been shared around the world by numerous individuals, including President Trump. The book in question is Volume 2 of The Steal, The Impossible Occurs. Joe, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Charles. Thanks for having me.
You know, we all witnessed the election steal, and everyone, I believe, in this country knows damn well what happened. It was done in broad daylight. A week later, the media declared Biden the winner, even before states that were being contested hadn't finished their contestations, and there had been huge swings. And I think that polls indicate then and now that about 60% of Republicans continue to believe that the election was stolen. I think more people than that would say so, but they were afraid to answer that question honestly when asked by pollsters because they were afraid they might have the FBI show up and bang their door in. Joe, so your book is quite relevant right now. And by the way, just as a sidebar, the Gateway Pundit is the greatest publication around right now. I look at it every day. I urge my listeners and viewers to do the same. You've been covering this story from day one. You're also covering the whole woke revolution and, cultural Marxism, and you're doing it in a way that's good old-fashioned journalism. This isn't the new kind of politicized stuff. This is real journalism. So I thank you for that, Joe. It's great work. So let's talk about your book. Give us the basic thesis.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me again, and nice of you to share that about the Gateway Pundit too. Well, let me tell you a little briefly about myself. I was a corporate executive for some time, and I was over in Hong Kong and moved there around 2011. And as I was climbing this corporate ladder, Jim was over here, and he started the Gateway Pundit, and he started that around 2004. He's my twin, and he didn't get a lot of traffic. Did it every day though, and day after day after day, and he started getting little blessings along the way, people recognition that really kept him going. And by 2016. The Gateway Pundit was one of the top 3 conservative websites that stood up against the big old legacy media. And as a matter of fact, there was a study done after the election, and Gateway Pundit was basically bigger. We'd even heard that one guy shared with us that Gateway Pundit was getting twice as many Twitter shares as CNN. So that was basically Jim. I started writing for him before the election. We both loved Trump. We loved the fact that he was smashing the media in the mouth because we've seen for years how just terribly dishonest they were. And so that's kind of when I got involved and had some real success right away. Got some big Drudge links. 2 days in a row, I had the headline at Drudge, and here I am, an executive over in Hong Kong doing a whole different job. I wasn't even a journalist. So that got me caught into it, and I wrote for Jim for the Gateway Pundit about 1 or 2 posts a day for about 4 years, and then in 2020 I came back to the States. Long story there, but after a long career at this one corporation, I decided to retire, and then I was here and writing for Jim full time. And in that period of time, we increased the volume at the Gateway Pundit from about 500,000 a day to about 5 million a day around the 2020 election. Yeah. And we, tenfold. And so and it was around the election. Not a lot of people were reporting on it. And certainly I was, and I kind of feel like I used my auditing skill set to kind of really say, hey, look at this, look at this, look at this. And then I had these people reach out to me, some really senior execs at some corporations saying, hey, I want to be anonymous, but take a look at this. And I had an actuary, for example, senior actuary at a major Fortune 500 corporation reach out to me, say, hey, look at this. I looked at Pennsylvania, look at the data here, blah, 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 blah. And you could see the data made no sense. It wasn't random. It was a straight line. And that as an auditor would absolutely send off red flags. So of there being some type of fraud. And so I had another senior guy at one of these big 4 accounting firms reach out to me and say, hey, Joe, look at this. He goes, I'm actually in charge of validating whether we can implement a system at our corporation, big corporation. And he says, I never would have allowed these basically at the time we were looking at the Dominion systems to ever be implemented in our system. There's just too many gaps, too many security issues. And that coincides with what we heard here recently, a couple of weeks ago, from this Haldeman report that came out of Georgia. Remember that investigation was done right after the election in 2020, and the corrupt Obama judge, Amy Totenberg, buried it for 2 years. They finally released it, and it says exactly that the systems are absolutely not secure, and that a bad actor can easily get in and basically flip an election. So
let me just ask a question about that, Joe. Was that the same report, the Haldeman report, that was sitting on the desk of corrupt Secretary of State Raffensperger when he took the phone call from President Trump?
Well, see, I don't know if he had it. I haven't heard that, but because it couldn't have happened because the report wasn't issued until let's say May of 2021. So that call was in.
All right.
Yeah, that call was in early December. But I've studied that call, by the way, quite a bit. There's a number of things with that. I'll just jump into that. The one is that Raffensperger was basically forced to have somebody monitor the election of 2020 because their primaries before that were so terrible that there was some sort of agreement, I believe, with the courts that they would bring somebody in to monitor Fulton County. So he selected this guy's name was Carter Jones, and he was there on election night, and he actually sent a message with a picture to Raffensperger's top attorney. His last name's Germany. That night around midnight, said, "Hey, I just saw Ralph just shove ballots through a block of ballots that I saw Shay just shove through over here." Basically stating these ballots are double counted. He
right,
said,
and also at that point, the video which Gateway Pundit ran of the famous lady with the blonde braids shoving the ballot into the server over and over and over again. This was not some conservative filming. This was actually at the counting center.
This was some video. Yeah, that was some video that came out. Rudy Giuliani and his team released that in early December, then about a month after the election, that they'd found that, hey, look, this video was taken the night of the election, and look at this. And quite frankly, the Gateway Pundit did a lot of work on that, and we're currently being sued by Ruby and Shay for defamation because we reported what we saw in those videos, and I really can't talk much about that. Understand. But my point here is that Germany, Raffensperger's attorney for the Secretary of State of Georgia, knew on election night that it was mayhem in Fulton County, and yet they had this call with President Trump in early January, so like 2 months later. And when President Trump lays all this out, they decide we're not going to share with President Trump that we knew on election night about mayhem occurring in Fulton County. And instead, President Trump lays out all these issues, and he received those. The issues he laid out came from his auditor that he had hired. And I've spoken with this auditor, a young guy who did all this work, and he came up with, let's say, 200,000 ballots that were totally in question. And Raffensperger lied, I believe, and said, "Oh, that's nothing. That's nothing. No dead people voted. That's a lie, blah, blah, blah." And anyways, Raffensperger ignored the president. He promised to get back to the president's auditor. He never did. I've talked to the auditor, said, "No, I never heard from Raffensperger after that." At the same time, the Senate put together a report basically stating that there's no way you could certify these results. And it was that was initiated by a state senator in Georgia who happens to also be a judge. So it's not like he was a novice at investigating things. And he laid out an excellent report. I talked to Rudy Giuliani about it a couple of weeks ago, and he said, yeah, that was a great report. He just well done. Well, the guy was a judge. He wasn't messing around. And there was just way too many questions. But Raffensperger ignored that as well. And so there's two individuals.
I think that the Gateway Pundit, correct me if I'm wrong, reported that Raffensperger's office had received a $6 million gift from the Zuckerbucks, from Zuckerberg, who wrote a personal check up for $420 million along with his wife to sort of what you might call grease a few palms People basically give it to these so-called nonprofits, which were made up of radicals who conducted a lot of the things like voter harvesting and going to nursing homes and signing ballots and all these other things.
Yeah, I can't really speak to that right now because of
Okay.
this court case,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, there's enough out there in the public realm to, in my opinion, then as being a corporate auditor, there was absolutely no way this election should have been certified in Georgia. There was
Right.
just
Plus,
no
you
way.
had Dinesh D'Souza's movie 2000 Mules, which
Yeah,
showed Georgia people stuffing the
yeah,
ballot
the ballot
boxes
boxes.
and
Yeah,
all of that. I mean, and that's
which
only
is
the tip of the iceberg.
yeah, and in some
So,
states
but in the
that's
meantime,
illegal. Yeah.
just to wrap it, I mean, Trump is they taped Trump's phone call illegally, and then they use it now to try to sue him by claiming that it was he who was interfering in the election. And that seems to be the pattern against Trump, anyways. He's constantly being bugged, he's being taped, he's being spied on. You have
Mm,
people releasing every time he goes to the bathroom, they send out a press release. And he's then being impeached for all of these things that are gathered illegally, even now with this guy Jack Smith releasing stuff every day and leaking stuff that's sent to him
yeah.
by people spying on him. So it's just the way they go about elections now. I mean, I think that's a big piece of it. But let's go back to your book.
Yeah, so actually, I've written now 3 books, and just this week I came out with The Steal, this volume 3. So my first book was about setting the stage and all the stuff that occurred before the election, the warnings that we were given, really, that hey, this election, we're not going to have a winner on election night. The 3 top individuals at big tech, the top of Google, Twitter, and Facebook all came out with messages about a month before the election stating that we're not going to have an individual president. Now, we're not going to know who that is on election night. This is despite what I also brought up in that first book was at all the rally. Trump had 1.1 million people at his rallies between Labor Day and Election Day, and at the same time, Biden had less than 2,000 people.
And just to confirm your report there, Molly Ball from Time Magazine, waiting until about a month after the election, wrote an article basically stating just this, that they had literally a meeting at Zuckerberg's house with these people, and they basically came up with a game plan for how to manage their media and the election in general.
Yeah, I mentioned that in the book. The thing that grabbed
Right.
me is months before the election, a couple months, we were given a warning that there's this guy by the name of Norm Eisen that's behind the scenes. He worked for Obama. He was Obama's ethics czar, and he was anything but that. But he was perfect to be Obama's ethics czar. And he spent the entire presidential administration of Trump just harassing Trump, trying to block his policies, coming up with these bogus law cases, getting these Obama judges to do these bogus rulings that eventually would make it up their way through the courts, that they'd overturn these knuckleheads. But Norm Eisen was behind all that. He even was one of the first people to talk in this first impeachment. So that's how much they, loved the work that he was doing, they being Obama and that gang of people that hated Trump. And so there was warnings that Norm Eisen was basically performing a color revolution in the U.S., where they would do this in other countries. The CIA would go out there, create havoc, create riots like, let's say, Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots.
So look what they did in Ukraine.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. And so that's what we were warned about. And then in that Time Magazine article that you're talking about, I mentioned this in my first book. What happens is the first person that they quote in that article is who? It's Norm Eisen. So it was like, wow, isn't that something? So there was, so I felt like I've talked to a guy in law enforcement. He says one way that they catch the criminals quite often is they brag. They brag about what they did, and that's what I think of with that Time Magazine article. It was they were bragging how they got
can't
away.
help it. Yeah, I mean, ultimately they have to talk. They have to blow their own whistle, and
yeah,
they try to
so
do
proud
it
of themselves.
They are, but they try to craft it in a way that they think can help them by using all sorts of sophistries. But ultimately, they will tell the truth. I've noticed this. You read the New York Times, you'll get the truth. You just have to know how to read it, how to get to the end of the story where they'll drop a few They'll basically
Well,
fill the
you
gap.
know, that's a good point. And the Washington Post came out with an article in like mid 2021 where they were patting themselves on the back, basically patting Obama's team on the back. And they told this whole story of how Obama had secret meetings in the White House leading up to the 2020 or 2016 election, how all these top people were there, many of them now in the Biden
Including
administration.
Biden. Yeah.
Yeah. And they would go down the basement. They weren't allowed to take papers with them or into the meeting. It was highly secret, but that the meeting involved Russia and how they needed to
Well,
stop
that's
Russia
where
from.
they cooked up the whole rotten
Yeah.
conspiracy theory that
Yeah.
Putin stole the election by
Yeah.
colluding
And it
with
was all
Trump.
a lie. It was all a
Of
lie. We know
course,
that
it's
now from
absurd
Durham. We
on
knew
the
it at the
face of
time,
it.
but they bragged about it. I think at that point they felt like they were going to get away with it. Trump was going to get he was going to get pushed out, and Trump. They didn't understand Trump. He's just like I compare him now. I have a lot more empathy for Richard Nixon, who, by the way, won the largest margin in U.S. history, 17 million more than the guy he ran against, and then within 2
Indeed.
years he's decides to resign. The deal is the CIA was involved with Nixon. Roger Stone shared that with me. Of the burglars that went into the Watergate building, like 3 of the 4 were CIA. Nixon didn't know that. He didn't know much about this at all. It was all a coup d'etat, an inside deal where they really forced him out. I think even the same people were involved. John Dean was a big player in that, and later on, he's one of the first people to testify in the first Trump impeachment as well. So it was like it was a planned coup d'etat, and it was for Trump, and it was for Nixon as well. And now we look back and we all the way to Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and we're starting to question now the CIA involvement. President Trump asked for those documents to be released, and we got this bogus excuse from the CIA director at the time, and that was the future Secretary of State who's now running for president.
And I also would tie that into the so-called insurrection. It looked like there was a lot of insider activity around that, because that actually was a coup d'etat, in that Biden was gavelled into office in the wee hours of the next morning with no media, no hearings. There was supposed to be hearings in 7 states, hearings that would have taken up to 2 hours. The whole country would have finally gotten to see the evidence of election fraud and then made up their own minds. But the whole thing was scuttled when the guy with the phony hat and face paint walked into the Capitol building. Then, it's really quite canny.
Well, so that's a great point. That's something that I wrote about here in this 3rd book. So I go in the 3rd book into the cover up. So the second book's all 7 books. The second book's just full of information on why this election never should have been certified. It's without a doubt. If you read that with an objective mind, there's only one conclusion: this stuff never should have been certified. And I base that based on my background in corporate world and doing audits around the world. Never had somebody in any language tell me I can't look at the systems. And I've never had anybody in any language ever tell me that just trust us on these numbers. They're fine. Just trust us, like they did in Philadelphia for three days after the election, behind closed doors, manufacture 80% of the absentee ballots for Joe Biden and give him the win in Pennsylvania. Lunacy. And so we'd never accept that in the corporate world, but they certainly these crooks certified these results for Biden. So anyways, that's the second. The 3rd book, though, I jump into that. January 6th is a big chapter, and I put some work into it. And you're absolutely right. They didn't allow the evidence to be presented. They all of a sudden, 4 of the key players in the Capitol, the leaders of the Senate and the leaders of the House, as well as Mike Pence, were all escorted off the floor, and they put the House into an emergency session. They come back hours later. Nancy Pelosi takes over, holds the vote, and they're done. There was no debates to be had.
That's right. That is literally a coup, and it was kind of a massive case of projection. My new book will be about the events of the Electoral Assembly and the Reichstag fire, drawing comparison. But either way, it seems like the right after that, it served many purposes besides leading to a second impeachment, which was finished after Trump was already out of office. It led to
insanity.
And it led to this massive regime of censorship that we're now dealing with, starting with President Trump himself. I mean, you guys seem to have overcome that with the Gateway Pundit, which is incredible. But
Well, not well. We've been, and I could tell you, and I wrote a book about this. In God We Trust, not lying liberal lunatics. And in that book, I talked about the big tech and how we were censored so bad and shadow banned, and how Zuckerberg would go in there and lie in front of Congress and say, "Oh no, we don't censor conservatives." And I did a study for Jim and Facebook. The top 10 conservative sites before the 2016 election, 1 year later, were down 95% in volume on Facebook. So you can't tell me they weren't being censored, and yet that was the message he was sharing to the House, and all those Republicans would just nod their heads. Okay, well, I guess nothing's happening. Well, they weren't listening, they weren't seeing what happened. So Gateway Pundit was fully censored by the time the 2020 election came. People were thirsting for the truth, though, and they just started coming to the Gateway Pundit because they knew they were going to get it. We're going to lay it out there. We're going to lay out, here's the truth. And that's what we did, and that's why we got so much traffic. But you're right, January 6th was a key day. Absolutely, absolutely, they had every right to dig into these numbers for sure, and that never happened because of the episodes that day.
And also, I think we should note that the Gateway Pundit has done a great job covering the DC Gulag, where you have people that were basically put in prison for even being on the lawn, did nothing wrong, and where they have not faced charges in many cases, where they're being tortured, where they're being put in solitary confinement. I mean, this guy Stuart Rhodes, who wasn't even in Washington D.C., has gotten a sentence of 20 years. I mean, the QAnon shaman was facing 20 years. They had to let him out because, fortunately, Tucker Carlson released tapes that were given to him by McCarthy that showed that he was basically escorted through the Capitol building, and he didn't do anything really wrong other than trespassing. But you're doing a great job of covering that story, and it's really a disgrace in this country that this kind of thing could happen.
Yeah, I really agree. Thanks, Charles. I think Jim and the team there. There's a couple girls out in D.C., Cara Castronueva and Powell, lovely ladies, beautiful girls, and they're working so hard to write and get the truth out about what's happening in D.C. They've just done a great job, and so yeah, we've helped a lot of those people. But they are being you talk about communism and fascism. This is what they do, and they basically steal an election and they imprison their political enemies.
That's
right, what they're trying to do.
Including the top guy, President Trump, whom they're trying
to
not only imprison him, but this is what they do classically in a communist country. They're going after his family members, they're going after his children. Apparently now they're going after his wife. I mean, they're going after his businesses. It is like a total communistic purge that is, I think Americans are waking up to it, at least according to polls that are coming out now.
Yeah, you're right. There was a big poll that came out 3 weeks ago. It was about the election, and they said 62% now. This is Rasmussen, big reputable firm. 62% of American voters believe that the election was rigged in 2020. Highest number yet, keeps going up, and 50% of Democrats. So independents and Republicans are about the same. They're like saying 70, 80% this election was rigged. And then you've got the Dems that now 50%. So it's Americans are waking up. They see it, and they don't trust mainstream media. So what you're doing here in the Gateway Pundit, and I've got a TV or radio show at TNTRadio.live, and I'm writing books, trying to get the message out. We're winning. We are winning because people don't trust these liars. They're just filthy liars, and we're not going to listen to that garbage anymore.
No, and I think it's also so obvious that they're covering up the results of the illegitimate election, which is a corrupt crime family in office. I mean, it's with the Hunter and with the brother and all the rest, and the amount of money that they've basically shaken down against foreign leaders by using the office of vice president and before that senator, and that is basically has influenced policy today. This it involves real crimes. I mean, or accusations of crimes that have been completely ignored or almost completely ignored by the mainstream media, and that's obvious to most people.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's disgusting, and this is why Trump's numbers grew during his presidency. It didn't matter what the media was saying. It was, his numbers grew from 63 million to 75 million. I'm sorry, I got some background noise here. They're
Nope,
doing some drilling next door, so my apologies.
that's all right. So the book is The Steal, Volume 2. Joe Hoft is my guest. The book is available at Amazon Books. Where else is it available, Joe?
Yeah, right now it's available to Amazon. It's so volume one is the Steel, setting the stage. Volume two is the Steel, the impossible occurs, where I list all the information. And volume three, that just came out this week, is the cover up.
Excellent. Well, listen, you're doing great work. Keep up the good work. I admire your courage. I admire the Gateway Pundit. And I do think you're right. We're winning. I feel optimistic because I think the American people are waking up.
Thank you so much, Charles. God bless you. Take care of
All right.
yourself.
Stay with you, Joe. Take care.
Okay. Bye bye.
Thank you.